In this week's Parashat Korah, Korah leads a rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu. Or actually, it's not so clear. Is he going against Moshe Rabbeinu? Is he going against Aharon, HaKohen? Because he basically makes the populist argument. He says, Moshe, I don't understand. Why is Aharon the Kohen Gadol? Why are you guys in charge? Aren't we all holy? Isn't Kulam Kedoshim? Aren't we all holy people? Do we really need a leader? Maybe we could have a rotating leadership. We should all be Kohen Gadol. Let's all be holy. Why do we have to have a leader over us? And ultimately, it's a terrible argument, and Korah dies a terrible, terrible death, as well as all of his followers. And it's actually the terrible story about the evil machloket created by Korah and his Edah and his followers. So, the commentators are bothered though, because Lefi Chazal, Korah actually was a pretty holy guy, or at least he had real holy desires. He wanted to be in charge, and part of it was for spiritual reasons. And he came from the house of Levi, and he was considered to be a pretty good person until he gave into his yatzara, into his jealousy, and it led to this week's parasha with all the terrible things, with Korah actually ultimately being a bad guy in Torah history. But initially they said he had major koach, and he had major potential, and he should have been great. So they're all bothered. How could Korah go wrong? What happened over here? So I read a very trippy Dvar Torah in a sefer called Gan Raveh. So says the Gan Raveh, quoting a Gemara in Yomah, he asks, Korah was pikeach. Korah was very smart, and how could it be that Korah messed up? He should have known that there was no way that he could be in charge. Why? Because there's a Gemara in Yomad of Kaf Bet Amud Bet 22b. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, said Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. He asked the following question. He goes, Mipnei ma lo nimshacha malchut Beit Shaul. Why did the kingdom of Shaul HaMelech, why did that not last? Why does it get passed over to David HaMelech? Answers the Gemara, Mipnei shelo haya bo shum dofi. Because there was no problems with Shaul HaMelech. What does that mean? Damar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yotzadak, because says Rabbi Yochanan, the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yotzadak, Ein ma'amidin parnas al tzibur, ela im ken kupa shel shvatzim tluya lo me'achorav. Says Rabbi Yochanan, the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yotzadak, we don't nominate somebody, we don't appoint somebody to be a leader of the Jewish people unless he has shvatzim, a kupav shvatzim achorav, unless he has, we'd say in English, skeletons in his closet, or as Rashi explains, unless he has a problem with his mishpacha. Meaning, says the Gemara, the only real Jewish leaders are going to come from people with flawed lineage. If you have perfect lineage, pristine, like every single person, the grandfather, the father, the son, everybody's perfect, there's no problems along the way, there's no skeletons in the closet, you can't be the leader of the Jewish people. Why not? Because whenever a Jewish leader gets haughty, or look at me, look at how great I am, and he starts to think, oh wait, maybe I'm the one that's doing it, and it's not God. I'm the big, strong guy. And he forgets about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he forgets about God, and he starts to get haughty, and he starts to get a little evil, he starts cheating, whatever he's doing wrong. The Jewish people can go up to that leader and say, Alo, you're nothing special. Do you know who your grandfather was? Do you know what you come from? You don't come from good lineage. And that's why David HaMelech has to come from Ruta Moabiyah, from the Moabites, from the whole issue of Lot with his daughters. He has to come from not the cleanest lineage. And throughout history, Moshe Rabbeinu, his father married his aunt. We know in Halakha, Yocheved was Amram's aunt, and you can't marry your aunt. So everybody that's going to be a Jewish leader, and if you actually get to Mashiach and David HaMelech, where they come from, it's total lineage along the whole way. We have Yehuda and Tamar, and there's story after story. Anybody who is going to lead the Jewish people has to come from some kind of problems, so we can say, oh, you're nothing special, and keep them on the right track, and that's how it goes. That's what the Gemara says. That's one of the requirements for it to be a leader. And Shaul HaMelech, says the Gemara, had perfect lineage. There was no problems over there. So Hashem said, no, I'm sorry, you can't lead the Jewish people. I need someone like David HaMelech, who's going to come from more tainted lineage. That's going to be the guy who's going to be the leader of the Jewish people. That's going to be the Melech. So ask Sefer Gan Raveh, how could Korah have messed up? How could Korah think he could be the leader of the Jewish people? Because if you look at Korah, he comes from perfect lineage. There's the pedigree up to Korah, everything. You look back, Korah's father, Yitzhar, and his grandfather, all the way back, everything is perfect. There's no problems with Korah. So Korah could never be a leader because he's too perfect. So answer Sefer Gan Raveh, Korah, we said, was very holy, he was spiritual. He had Ruach HaKodesh. He could see into the future. And Korah saw in the future, he's going to have a great-great-grandson named Shmuel HaNavi, Samuel. And Shmuel HaNavi was considered to be one of the greatest Nevi'im. He was so holy. He was so righteous. We even say in Tehillim, we say, Moshe v'Aaron b'choanav, u'Shmuel b'korei shemo. Moshe v'Aaron in their keuna, and Shmuel, when he calls out in God's name, they all call out to Kadosh Baruch Hu, to God, B'hu Ya'anem, and God answers them. Pasuk in Tehillim, and Pasuk says, Moshe v'Aaron b'choanav, u'Shmuel b'korei shemo. Which some of the commentators say, oh look, we have Moshe v'Aaron on one side, and Shmuel on the other side. Look, Shmuel is even as great as Moshe v'Aaron in certain aspects. So look at how great Shmuel was. And Korah saw that Shmuel was so perfect, he also had perfect pedigree. Shmuel's father, his grandfather, everybody was perfect along the way. So said Korah, if I could see in the future that my great-grandson Shmuel is going to be so great, and he had perfect lineage, it must be that this halacha in Yomah, in the Gemara in Yomah, this halacha that says that God will only appoint leaders that don't have a perfect lineage, it must not be true. Because look, Shmuel didn't see that Shmuel is perfect. But says Sefer Gan Raveh, but Korah got it wrong. Because what was the skeletons in Shmuel's closet? What was the bad lineage that Shmuel came from? Korah. Korah in this week's parasha with his big mess up, that's going to make Shmuel's lineage tainted, and that's what is going to make it that Shmuel can actually lead the Jewish people, because his bad lineage is going to be Korah himself. It's just that in the timeline of this week's parasha, Korah hadn't sinned yet. Pretty trippy. Shabbat Shalom.